Have you ever met someone whose entire existence hinges on a tape measure and a profound, agonizing lack of hobbies? If you haven't, consider yourself blessed because I have. And her name is Brenda. I live in Gainesville, Florida, a place where the humidity hits you like a wet mattress the second you step outside, and the local homeowners association presidents are bred in some kind of secret underground lab to be as insufferable as humanly possible. As a 1099 independent contractor managing video project workflows, I spend most of my days inside, staring at ClickUp boards, trying to get my editors to meet their deadlines, and enjoying the air conditioning. Working from home means I'm around during the day, which unfortunately means I am completely exposed to the daytime patrols of the Cypress Creek HOA. I was just trying to check my mail. That was my first mistake. I was standing in my driveway, squinting against the blinding Florida sun, when I heard the unmistakable clack-clack-clack of sensible orthopedic walking shoes marching up the asphalt. I turned, and there she was. Brenda. She sported a blonde bob so stiff with hairspray it could probably deflect small arms fire, and she was clutching a clipboard against her chest like it held the nuclear launch codes. She didn't even say hello. She just stopped at the edge of my property line, adjusted her transition lenses, and aggressively pointed a manicured finger at my car. Now, for context, I drive a 2012 Honda Civic. Is it a Ferrari? No. Does it have a tiny, barely noticeable scratch on the rear bumper from a rogue shopping cart incident back in 2019? Yes. Does it get me from point A to point B without bursting into flames? Also yes. Section 12, paragraph B, Brenda announced, her voice pitching up into a nasal whine that instantly gave me a migraine. All vehicles parked in driveways must maintain the aesthetic harmony of the Cypress Creek neighborhood. I stared at her, then looked at my deeply average, completely inoffensive silver sedan, and then back to her. Brenda, it's a Honda. It's practically the official car of aesthetic neutrality. What are you talking about? It's an eyesore, she said, her lips thinning into a hard line. That scratch on the bumper is a blight. Furthermore, the paint on the hood is oxidizing. It brings down the property value of every house on this cul-de-sac. You need to park it in your garage, get it towed off the premises. My garage is full of camera gear and production equipment, I replied, forcing a polite smile that physically hurt my face. I can't park it in there, and I'm definitely not towing my own functioning vehicle because you don't like a scratch. Brenda smiled, and it was a terrifying reptilian thing. She ripped a piece of paper from her clipboard and thrust it toward me. Rules are rules, sweetheart. We don't do ugly in Cypress Creek. You have 48 hours to remove the eyesore, or the fines will compound daily. I took the paper. It was a laminated pink slip, a citation for $250. I stood there, holding this absurd piece of plastic, watching Brenda march away to go measure someone else's mailbox height. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. A strange, eerie calm washed over me. I walked back inside my house, dropped the citation on my desk right next to my open laptop, and completely ignored the 3 urgent messages from my lead editor. If Brenda wanted aesthetic harmony, I was going to give her a symphony. I spent the next 6 hours in a fugue state of pure, unadulterated, malicious research. I pulled up the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, better known as the CC&Rs. These documents are usually written by lawyers who charge by the word and hate human joy. I read every single line of Section 12 regarding vehicles. The rules were extensive: no recreational vehicles, no boats, no trailers, no commercial livery vehicles, no heavy machinery, no hearses. I paused. No hearses. They specifically banned hearses. I leaned back in my office chair, steepling my fingers. Why would they specifically ban a hearse? Because they are commercial mortuary vehicles, technically. But what if it wasn't commercial? My brain started connecting dots at an alarming speed. I opened a new tab and dove into the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicle statutes. It took me about 45 minutes of digging through dense legalese before I found the Holy Grail, Florida Statute 320.086. According to the great state of Florida, any vehicle manufactured over 30 years ago can be registered as an antique. Here was the kicker, the beautiful, glorious loophole that made me laugh out loud in my empty house. If a hearse is stripped of its commercial mortuary license, sold to a private citizen, retitled, and given an antique plate, the DMV legally reclassifies it. It ceases to be a commercial hearse. On paper, under the eyes of the law, it officially becomes a private passenger station wagon. The HOA bylaws banned hearses. They explicitly banned commercial vehicles. But nowhere in the 80-page document did they ban antique passenger station wagons. I didn't just need a new car, I needed the most terrifying, imposing, psychologically damaging station wagon in the southeastern United States. The internet is a weird place, but if you look hard enough, you can find anything. 3 days later, I found myself pulling into a gravel lot in Ocala, about an hour and a half south of Gainesville. The place was equal parts salvage yard and tetanus hazard. Waiting for me was a guy named Joe, who insisted I call him Toeless Joe for reasons I desperately did not want to ask about. Joe was chewing on a toothpick and leaning against what could only be described as a land yacht from the underworld. It was a 1974 Cadillac Superior coach. It was 21 feet of faded black steel, featuring sweeping, aggressive lines, a massive chrome grille that looked like it wanted to eat you, and dark purple velvet curtains lining the absurdly long rear windows. It was magnificent. It was horrifying. "She runs fine," Joe grunted, slapping the hood. A cloud of ancient dust puffed into the humid air. "AC is busted. Smells a little weird in the back. You ain't gonna use this for nothing weird, right?" "Joe, I assure you, my intentions are purely spiteful," I said, walking around the massive vehicle. "Has the commercial license been completely stripped from the title?" Yeah. Mortuary down in Tampa went under 10 years ago. It's just a regular old hunk of metal now. Clean title." I handed Joe $3,000 in crumpled $100 bills. He handed me a single, suspiciously sticky key. Driving that monster back up I-75 to Gainesville was a sensory experience I will never forget. The suspension was so soft it felt like piloting a waterbed. The engine roared with the terrifying power of a 472 cubic inch V8 that got roughly 4 miles to the gallon. It smelled faintly of old vinyl, stale cigars, and something distinctly clinical, like formaldehyde. Every time I changed lanes, smaller cars scattered like startled fish. I was sweating through my shirt, wrestling with the massive steering wheel and vibrating with an electric, chaotic excitement. But I couldn't just park it in my driveway looking like a rusted relic. If I was going to use this weapon against Brenda, it needed to be pristine. It needed to gleam. I bypassed my neighborhood entirely and drove straight to Mad Mike's auto body on the industrial side of town. Mike was a heavily tattooed contractor I had used a few years back when someone sideswiped my old truck. He was a mechanical genius who thrived on absolute chaos, and he was the only man I trusted for this project. When I pulled the Cadillac into his garage bay, Mike dropped the socket wrench he was holding. It clattered loudly against the concrete. He walked slowly up to the hood, running a grease-stained hand over the faded paint. "Man," Mike breathed, looking at me with a mixture of deep respect and profound concern. "Whose funeral are you planning?" "Brenda from the HOA's ego," I replied, tossing him the sticky key. "Mike, I need a rush job. I need the chrome polished until it's blindingly bright. I need the paint buffed so hard it looks like a black mirror. I need the tint on those back windows darkened until it's illegal, and then I need you to roll it back just enough so the cops won't ticket me." Mike grinned, revealing a chipped front tooth. "I can do that. Gonna cost you, though. What else?" "I need a custom horn," I said, leaning in closer. "Can you wire an air horn that plays the first few bars of Chopin's Funeral March?" Mike stared at me for a long, silent moment. "You are a deeply unwell human being," he said. "I love it. Give me 4 days." Those 4 days were pure agony. I paid my $250 fine to the HOA online, just to ensure I was in perfectly good standing. I took an Uber to the DMV, armed with my title and my meticulously organized paperwork. I stood in line for 2 hours, approached the counter, and dealt with a clerk who looked like she hadn't smiled since 1998. When she handed me my new registration and my blue antique vehicle license plates, I nearly wept. Right there, printed under the body type section, were the magical letters: Stay Wag, Station Wagon. It was legally bulletproof. When I picked the Cadillac up from Mike's shop, it was a dark masterpiece. The chrome was so bright it physically hurt to look at. The black paint looked deep and wet. The velvet curtains had been dry cleaned and hung perfectly straight. I hit the steering wheel, and a deafening, mournful, heavy bass rendition of the Funeral March echoed through the garage. It was time to go home. I waited until exactly 2 in the morning. The suburban streets of Cypress Creek were dead silent. I turned off the Cadillac's headlights a block away and idled it down the street, the massive V8 purring like a giant sleeping dragon. I backed it up my driveway with surgical precision. I didn't just park it, I staged it. I positioned the 21-foot beast so that the massive, highly polished rear window was perfectly mathematically aligned with Brenda's front door directly across the street. When she woke up, poured her coffee, and opened her front door to retrieve her morning paper, she wasn't going to see a Honda Civic with a scratched bumper. She was going to stare directly into the abyss of a fully restored, terrifyingly pristine 1974 death wagon. I went inside, locked the door, set up a small camera on my windowsill, and brewed a pot of coffee. I didn't sleep a wink. I just sat by the window, waiting for the sun to rise. At exactly 7:15 in the morning, the heavy wooden door of Brenda's house swung open. She stepped out onto her porch, wearing a pink matching tracksuit, bending down to pick up the local Gazette. As she stood up, she casually glanced across the street. I watched through the blinds as she froze. It was like someone had hit the pause button on reality. She dropped the newspaper. The thud was barely audible, but in my mind, it was deafening. She took a step back, her hands flying up to her mouth. She stood there for a full 2 minutes, just staring at the sheer volume of black steel dominating my property. Then, the reaction hit. She didn't walk. She sprinted back into her house, slamming the door so hard I saw the frame rattle from across the street. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood had officially been restored. It didn't take long for the cavalry to arrive. At precisely 7:45, a Gainesville Police Department cruiser rolled slowly down the street, its tires crunching quietly against the pavement. It parked right in front of my driveway, lights flashing lazily in the morning sun. 2 officers stepped out, both looking incredibly confused. Before they could even approach my house, Brenda came tearing out of her front door, practically hyperventilating, waving her arms frantically at them. I grabbed my folder of meticulously prepared documents, took a deep breath, and walked out my front door to greet my guests. "Officers, good morning," I called out, plastering on my absolute best, most non-threatening customer service smile. I strolled down the driveway, completely ignoring the fact that Brenda was standing 3 feet away, vibrating with a rage so intense it was practically emitting a high-frequency hum. "Arrest him!" Brenda screeched, pointing a trembling finger first at me and then at the massive black Cadillac reflecting the morning sun. "I want him arrested right now. He is running an unlicensed mortuary out of a residential zone. There could be a dead body in that thing. It's a biohazard. It's a violation of Section 12. It's—" "Ma'am, please, just take a breath," the older of the two officers said, holding up a hand. He was a veteran cop, probably in his late 40s, with the exhausted, deeply lined face of a man who had responded to way too many suburban noise complaints in his career. His partner, a younger guy, who looked like he was fresh out of the academy, was biting the inside of his cheek so hard I was genuinely worried he was going to draw blood. He was staring at the hearse, and then at me, and I could tell it was taking every ounce of his professional willpower not to burst into hysterical laughter. The older officer turned to me, resting his hand on his duty belt. "Sir, your neighbor here called dispatch in a bit of a panic. She claims you've started an illegal funeral business on your property." "Officers, honestly, I literally have no idea what she's talking about," I said, widening my eyes in feigned innocence. "I'm a project manager. I work in video production. I sit at a computer all day. I certainly don't run a mortuary." "It's a hearse!" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing off the stucco walls of the neighboring houses. A few blinds twitched across the street. We were drawing an audience. "Look at it! It has velvet curtains. It's a death machine. He parked it facing my house on purpose to threaten me." I slowly turned to look at the Cadillac, as if I was seeing it for the very first time. I admired the gleam of the chrome, the deep, mirror-like finish of the black paint, and the pristine blue antique license plate screwed onto the rear bumper. "Oh, you mean my vintage 1974 station wagon?" I asked, turning back to the officers. "I'm a collector, you see. Classic American steel. Really hard to find them in this kind of condition nowadays." The younger officer actually let out a snort, quickly disguising it as a cough, turning his head away to stare intently at a nearby patch of grass. The older officer's eyebrow twitched. He looked at the 21-foot-long mortuary vehicle, then looked back at me. "Sir," the older cop said, his voice dropping an octave, adopting a tone of extreme patience. "That is a hearse." "Well, aesthetically, I suppose I can see why my neighbor might be confused, given the, unique coachwork," I said smoothly, opening my manila folder. "But legally speaking, under the eyes of the great state of Florida, that is a private passenger station wagon." I pulled out the crisp, freshly printed registration document from the DMV and handed it over. The older officer took it. He looked at the VIN number on the paper, walked over to the dashboard of the Cadillac to verify it, and then stood there for a solid minute, reading the document. I watched his eyes scan down to the body type designation. I watched him read the letters STA-WAG. I watched a slow, reluctant smile spread across his face. He walked back over and handed me the paper. "Everything appears to be in order, sir." "Are you blind?" Brenda demanded, storming forward. "It's a hearse. It's a commercial vehicle. It violates the Cypress Creek covenants, conditions, and restrictions." The officer sighed, the smile vanishing, replaced by the weary exhaustion of a man who just wanted to go get a cup of coffee. "Ma'am, the Cypress Creek HOA bylaws are a civil matter, not a criminal one. My jurisdiction is state law. And according to the state of Florida, this gentleman is the registered owner of an antique passenger vehicle. It is legally tagged, it is legally insured, and it is parked on private property. He hasn't broken a single law. If you have a dispute about community bylaws, you need to take it up with your board. Have a nice day." "But it's an eyesore," she wailed, clutching her chest as if the sheer existence of the car was causing her physical pain. "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, Brenda," I said politely. "I think the aesthetic harmony is vastly improved." The cops got back in their cruiser. As they pulled away, the younger officer gave me a very subtle two-finger salute through the window. Brenda stood on my lawn for another 30 seconds, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, before she spun on her heel and power-walked back to her house. I smiled, patted the cold steel of the Cadillac, and went back inside to start my workday. The silence lasted exactly 3 days. On Thursday afternoon, I received a certified letter in the mail. It was a formal emergency summons to appear before the Cypress Creek HOA Board of Directors at the community clubhouse the following evening. The charge: gross violation of Section 12, Paragraph B, prohibited commercial and nuisance vehicles. The penalty listed was a mandatory tow at the owner's expense, plus a daily fine of $100 until the vehicle was permanently removed. The clubhouse was a heavily air-conditioned, soul-sucking room that smelled like chlorine from the adjacent community pool and cheap filter coffee. When I walked in at 7:00 p.m. on Friday, the atmosphere was incredibly tense. A folding table had been set up at the front of the room. Brenda sat dead center, flanked by 3 other board members who looked like they would rather be anywhere else on Earth. To Brenda's right sat a man in a rumpled suit, rubbing his temples. This was Stan, the HOA's retained legal counsel. Stan looked like he hadn't slept since 2015. There were about 15 other residents sitting in the folding chairs facing the board. Word had clearly gotten around about the hearse, and people were here for the drama. I took a seat in the front row, setting my manila folder neatly on my lap. Brenda slammed a wooden gavel down on the table. "I call this emergency session to order. We are here to address the blatant, malicious, and frankly disturbing violation of community guidelines by the resident at 404-2 Elmwood Drive." She glared at me. Section 12 of our bylaws explicitly prohibits commercial livery vehicles, specifically including hearses. We have photo evidence, multiple resident complaints, and my own eyewitness testimony that you are harboring a hearse on your property. "I would like to state for the record," I said, projecting my voice clearly across the room, "that I do not own a hearse." A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's face turned a shade of mottled purple. "Don't play games with me. It is parked in your driveway. It is 20 feet long. It is black, and it has velvet curtains. It is a hearse." "Brenda, a hearse is a commercial vehicle utilized by a licensed mortuary for the transport of the deceased," I replied calmly, standing up. "I do not own a mortuary. I have not transported any deceased individuals. What I own is a 1974 Cadillac Superior coach." "Which is a hearse!" she screamed, hitting the gavel again. "Which is," I corrected, pulling the notarized copy of my vehicle title and the printed Florida DMV statute from my folder, "a private passenger station wagon, legally speaking." I walked up to the folding table and slid the documents over to Stan, the lawyer. Stan sighed, adjusted his glasses, and picked up the papers. "I mean, honestly, Brenda," I continued, pacing slowly in front of the table, "I read the CC&Rs cover to cover. I really did. You explicitly ban commercial vehicles. You explicitly ban hearses. But you know what you don't ban? Antique passenger vehicles. According to Florida Statute 320.86, a vehicle of this age, stripped of its commercial status and retitled to a private citizen, defaults to a station wagon. State law defines the class of the vehicle, and your bylaws, as drafted, must legally comply with state definitions, unless you want to argue with the Department of Motor Vehicles. Stan was reading the statute and then looking at the title. I saw him close his eyes and slowly massage the bridge of his nose. "This is ridiculous," Brenda snapped, reaching for the papers. Stan pulled them away from her. "I don't care what some DMV loophole says. It looks like a hearse, it acts like a hearse, and we are having it towed tomorrow morning. I have already authorized the towing company." I stopped pacing. I looked directly at Brenda, and I let the polite customer service smile completely drop from my face. "Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, serious calm that echoed in the quiet room. "If you or anyone acting on your behalf sets 1 foot on my private property and hooks a chain to my legally registered antique passenger vehicle, you will not be enforcing a bylaw. You will be committing grand theft auto." The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to quiet down. "I suggest you consult with your counsel," I said, gesturing to Stan. "Under Florida Statute 713.78, towing a legally parked, properly registered passenger vehicle from private property without the owner's consent or a valid, legally binding civil injunction is considered a felony theft of a motor vehicle. If a tow truck shows up, I will not call the HOA. I will call the police. I will press felony charges against the tow truck driver. I will press felony charges against you for authorizing it, and I will personally sue this HOA board into absolute oblivion for damages, distress, and legal fees. Would you like me to spell that out for the meeting minutes, or did everyone get it?" Brenda was frozen. She looked at Stan. "Stan, tell him he's wrong. Tell him we can tow it." Stan looked at the paperwork, then looked at Brenda. He sighed, a deep, rattling sound that seemed to come from his soul. "Brenda, he's right. The bylaws specify commercial hearses. The state classifies this specific vehicle as an antique station wagon. Because the bylaws don't specifically ban antique passenger station wagons, we cannot legally mandate its removal. And if we tow a compliant vehicle from his deeded property, yes, that would expose the board to massive legal liability. We can't touch the car." Brenda looked as if she had just been physically struck. She slumped back in her folding chair, staring blankly at the wall. The residents behind me started whispering, a few of them openly chuckling. "So," I said, clapping my hands together once, shattering the silence. "Unless there are any further questions regarding the aesthetic harmony of my station wagon, I'll be heading home. I have to wake up early to polish the chrome." I turned and walked out of the clubhouse. I didn't look back. I just walked out into the warm Florida night, feeling lighter than I had in years. The aftermath was glorious, honestly. The hearse stayed exactly where it was. Brenda never issued me another citation. In fact, 2 days after the board meeting, I watched a contractor's van pull up to her house. They spent 4 hours installing heavy, industrial-grade blackout curtains on every front-facing window of her property. She literally chose to live in darkness rather than look at my masterpiece. I kept the Cadillac for about 6 months. I used it for everything. I took it to the grocery store, parking it diagonally across the back of the lot. I took it to the drive-thru at Starbucks, which was a logistical nightmare, but entirely worth the look on the barista's face. I even drove it to a client meeting once, just to see if I could. Eventually, though, the 4 miles to the gallon gas mileage started eating into my budget, and I realized I had made my point. I ended up listing it on an online marketplace and sold it for a $2,000 profit to a local goth band who wanted to use it as their tour van. They were thrilled. I was thrilled. And Brenda? Well, I guess Brenda learned a very valuable lesson about the dangers of micromanaging the wrong person's driveway. Honestly, I mean, if someone comes up to you and tells you your totally normal functioning car is an eyesore, don't get mad. Don't yell. Just smile, nod, and go buy an antique station wagon. Because there is nothing more beautiful than the aesthetic harmony of absolute malicious compliance. Stay compliant, stay petty, and I'll catch you guys in the next sovereign ruling. Honestly, I thought the saga was completely over after the HOA backed down. But I mean, life has a funny way of delivering the punchline when you least expect it. I guess I really shouldn't have been surprised that the final act of this whole mess ended up being the most ridiculous part of the entire experience. Like, I had already won, but the universe decided Brenda needed one more little push over the edge of sanity. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about a month before I officially handed the keys over to that goth band I mentioned. They called themselves Nocturnal Edict, or something equally dramatic, and they were driving up from Orlando to finalize the sale and test if all their gear would actually fit in the back of the Cadillac. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the stifling Florida heat, when a beat-up 1998 Toyota Corolla sputtered up to my curb. 4 people piled out, and I literally mean piled out. They were dressed in head-to-toe black leather, massive platform boots with enough buckles to set off an airport metal detector from a mile away, and white face paint that was immediately starting to sweat off in the 90-degree humidity. The lead singer, a guy who introduced himself as Vlad, but whose driver's license definitely said Kevin, walked up my driveway looking like he was about to pass out from heat stroke. "Is this the vessel?" Kevin asked, pointing a heavily ringed finger at the hearse. "That's the vessel, man," I said, trying so hard not to laugh. "Let me grab the keys." I unlocked the back door of the Cadillac. The hinges groaned, a sound that I swear Kevin and his bandmates practically swooned over. They spent the next hour hauling massive, battered guitar amplifiers, a drum kit, and a literal smoke machine out of their Corolla and shoving it into the back of my legally registered station wagon. And because they were musicians, they couldn't just load the gear, they had to test the acoustics. "We need to make sure the resonance holds up in the cargo area," the bassist, a girl with spiked hair and a dog collar, explained to me completely deadpan. "I mean, be my guest," I said, leaning against my mailbox. Kevin plugged a portable power bank into a bass amp, hooked up a microphone, and just let out this guttural, deafening death metal screech that echoed down Elmwood Drive like a bomb going off. The smoke machine hissed, billowing thick, artificial fog out of the back of the hearse, creeping down my driveway and rolling into the street. Right on cue, Brenda's front door flew open. She wasn't in her pink tracksuit this time. She was wearing an apron and holding a spatula, looking absolutely unhinged. She took 3 steps onto her lawn, froze, and just stared at the scene unfolding across the street. There was a 21-foot hearse billowing theatrical fog into the suburban afternoon, surrounded by 4 sweating goths loading musical equipment into it, while occasionally screaming into a microphone to test the levels. I gave her a little wave. Brenda didn't scream this time. She didn't march over. She didn't quote a single section of the bylaws. She just stood there, the spatula trembling in her hand, staring into the fog like a woman who had completely lost her grip on reality. I think, in that exact moment, she finally understood that some battles just aren't worth fighting, especially when your opponent has weaponized a loophole and sold it to a heavy metal band. She turned around, walked back inside, and shut the door with a quiet, defeated click. "Hey man," Kevin called out, wiping white makeup and sweat off his forehead. "The acoustics in here are actually sick. We'll take it. Do you accept Venmo or do you want, cash?" "Cash is fine, Kevin," I said, smiling as the artificial fog slowly dissipated into the humid Florida air. "And honestly, please, lay on the horn when you drive it out of the neighborhood." They did. The mourners' march echoed all the way to the highway, and I swear the property values in Cypress Creek went up just a little bit that day simply because the HOA's ego had been so thoroughly deflated. Honestly, you literally cannot put a price on that kind of peace and quiet.